Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Capital Ideas, where we celebrate the innovators and disruptors in the capital markets that bring ideas to fruition. I'm Nick Morgan, the co-founder of ICANN, Investor Choice Advocates Network, and the co-host of today's episode.
And I'm Dara Albright. I am the co-host and a very proud board member of ICANN. And please join us today in welcoming Nathan Leung to the show. Nathan is a software engineer who describes himself as one of Silicon Valley's youngest and poorest angel investors. Nathan has a blog called Natecation, where he chronicled his journey to becoming an accredited investor by meeting the knowledge-based criteria that was put into effect in 2020. So Nathan, I love your story. I think it's so inspirational. In fact, it epitomizes every reason why I've been do what I do and been in this, industry for all of these years. And it's all about democratizing access to the, access to capital and opportunities, to the masses. And, so I really enjoyed reading your journey. And I think that you really framed the injustice of the accredited investor rule perfectly in a sentence that you stated, and I'm just going to read it. You say that, as a college student last year, I could accumulate $50,000 of student debt, carry tens of thousands of dollars on my credit cards, and bet without limits on anything from random number generator outputs to Japanese baseball. But I couldn't legally give my startup founder friend $1,000 for their company. And I think you're right. That's exactly, the situation that we find ourselves in now. So maybe you could just start by sharing your story with the listeners.
Yeah, Nick and Dara, thanks so much for having me on. I'm really excited to be here. I'm happy to share a little bit about my story and my background. So I've been interested in technology and startups since a very young age. And when I first got to college, I studied computer science, got a summer internship in the San Francisco Bay Area, and met a bunch of people in startups, and realized after my freshman year that I wanted to do something a little bit more exciting than going back to school for my second year. So I decided to join a startup full time, worked there for a year, made a lot of friends in the space. And I was actually catching up with one of those friends I'd made in San Francisco in late 2020, another early startup employee. And he remarked to me that he was interested in starting in angel investing. And I was really surprised because, being in this space, I knew that angel investing was a thing that people did, but I always assumed that you had to be really rich or already exited to be able to do that. But he actually told me that the SEC had changed the rules. So in August 2020, in addition to the net worth and income requirements, they added a third way to qualify for accreditation, which was passing one of three financial licensing exams, either the Series 7, 65 or 82. So the 7 and the 82 required you to be an employee of a firm and be sponsored by the firm, but the 65 was actually one that you could do completely on your own, without any sort of firm sponsor or permission. So the 65 was the route that my friend was going to take to become an accredited investor, and he told me to check it out. He sent me some study materials, and I was honestly immediately intrigued because I'd heard of angel investors, like living in Silicon Valley and working in Silicon Valley. You hear about these amazing investors who were the first checks into these iconic companies. And it seemed like a really cool thing for me to be able to do as well. So did some more research into the exam, found like a couple other people who were actually also interested in doing it. The Twitterverse was actually really excited about this rule change in San Francisco. We exchanged study materials. Over the next couple of months, I studied for the exam and went to a testing center, did the whole computer-based exam, and eventually in May of 2021, I passed the exam. So I was really excited, but did some more research, and turns out passing the exam isn't the only thing that you need to do in order to become an accredited investor. You actually need to be a quote licensee in good standing, and for each of the different licenses, in good standing means something different. In the case of the Series 65, it means you have to be a practicing investment advisor. The Series 65 is the investment advisor exam. It's the one that qualifies you to become someone who can give financial advice. I guess I didn't let that stop me. I kind of Googled around and found out that I could start my own investment advisory firm. It just required a lot of paperwork to be filed with the SEC in the state, which I guess was initially daunting, but I realized all this stuff is public record. So you can actually go to the SEC's website and look up other companies, other independent investment advisors, registration forms. So what I ended up doing was I looked up, other investment advisory firms, saw what they were putting down on the form and kind of used that to guide my filling out of the form. And I did this. I was a college student, didn't have that much money, so I didn't want to talk to a lawyer or anything. Just filled out the form, send it to the SEC, just hope for the best. Waited to see what they would say. We actually ended up going back and forth a couple times. The people who were processing the forms at the SEC were actually quite helpful. They sent emails back to me saying like, "Oh, you're missing this form, or you're missing this value here." But after a couple of back and forths, it took me probably a month or two to get all the paperwork in order. I was approved by the SEC. I got an entry on advisorinfo.sec.gov, which is the SEC's investment advisor database. And at that point, I officially became an accredited investor, satisfying the definition or the rule set out in August 2020 by the commission. So yeah, that's kind of the long-ish story, I guess, of how I became an accredited investor.
How many companies did you invest in when you had when you got started?
So, as a college student, I actually still didn't have that much money. I think the novelty more so for me was being able to invest. But the cool thing was I was able to have a lot of conversations with founder friends, not only as like a prospective like candidate, but also just as a kind of from the investor's perspective, which was really cool. I did end up investing in one of my coworkers' companies, which was really cool. I think really the magic of Silicon Valley and the startup scene is this like cycle of people working together and then investing each other. And it's like a positive sum environment where everybody kind of roots for each other. And if one person wins, because everybody's hopefully investing in each other, everybody wins, which is it was just like a really cool experience.
Glad you had that. As you were describing what you did, and when I read what you did, I don't know if you realize how unusual that all is. Like, first of all, passing the Series 65 is not easy. Like, it's a difficult exam. But then to go the further step and go through the process with the SEC, that's just incredible. So kudos to you for doing that.
Thank you.
Just,
really incredible.
Yeah.
Now, I love your story. The part I found actually concerning and disturbing about the part was when I read that the SEC then contacted you and requested that you stop using your 65 license for the purpose of making angel investments. And I was wondering if maybe you could discuss how that all went down, because that makes me mad. So
yeah. So I think the way the approval process works for new firms is that they kind of, I don't know, just approve the firm. They don't do like a really detailed audit, and then they'll do more detailed audits later after you're kind of on ramped and practicing. So what happened was about 18 months after my after my investment advisor firm registration was initially approved, I got a call from the San Francisco field office of the SEC. The agent on the phone was just like, "Oh, hi, like we're reaching out. We do spot checks of new firms. We just want to make sure that you've got everything you need in order to be running a successful business." So at this point, it was 18 months after I'd initially been approved, and I've submitted 2 ADV1s and ADV2s. I forget the name of the exact form, but these annual reports that you need to submit as a practicing investment advisor. But the thing was, like, I was using my license in order to become an accredited investor. I wasn't actually intending to be like an investment advisor. So I had 0 assets under management. The compliance burden I tried to keep as low as possible. Wasn't custodying any customer funds because it didn't have any customers, and that was the point. And I was submitting all of the paperwork that I thought I should have been submitting. So I took the call, wasn't really expecting anything out of it. They just kind of asked me a couple of questions, one of which was, "Oh, we noticed you had 0 assets under management for the last 2 years. What's going on?" To which I answered like, "Oh, like I'm not actually, looking to be like a practicing investment advisor right now. It's nice to have the license." I was like, I'm personally interested in finance, which is part of why I took this exam. I've worked at fintech companies before. Could be cool to do something in investment advisory. A couple of my friends are actually working on startups in the investment advisory space, and they had to get the Series 65. So having a license was good, but I was also like, oh, but I also use this license to invest in companies and to satisfy the accredited investor definition. So I guess it was all well and good, and I think that might have been the end of the first call, but they also said, oh, in addition to I guess as part of the spot check, we also like want to take a look at your records and make sure that you're following all the rules and stuff like that. So that was the end of the first call. They sent me an email explaining what records I needed to sent them over, and I guess in the second call, they called me again after looking at the records, and they were like, I appreciate that they said like, oh, like I think it's cool that you're doing this after I explained to them the whole accredited investor side of things. But they were also like, we noticed looking through your records that you're missing this one compliance item, and we know that like you're not practicing the accredited investor, or excuse me, the investment advisor registration process isn't really designed for people to just use it to invest, and we recommend that you withdraw your registration until you're ready to like practice as an actual investment advisor. I guess they also said that because of this compliance violation, we could like proceed with I don't know, enforcement or discipline or something along those lines, but just because I was like how old was I then, like a 22-year-old kid, and I didn't have any assets under management. They were just like, like it's chill, but we have to do our jobs. We think it's cool what you're doing, but we just recommend that you withdraw for now. And that was that.
Wow. Well, I will reserve comment on the SEC staff's, the exam staff's position there, but that is.
I do want to say, like the guys there were super chill about it. Like nothing against like the boots on the ground. Like I appreciate how nice they were about it.
That makes sense, and I'm glad to hear they were polite, and of course they're doing what they think is right. But so I won't comment further on that. Your description of what happened, but obviously there's quite a bit of momentum around the idea that the accredited investor financial restrictions need some reform. Among other things, a member of the Senate Banking Committee, Senator Tim Scott, and others on the Senate Banking Committee have proposed legislation that would change the accredited investor requirements. Well, let me ask it this way. Are you in favor of reform of that? And if so, why would it be useful to reform the definition?
Yeah, I think the provision specifically that Senator Scott's bill that interests me the most is this accredited investor exam, which is sort of similar to the exam process that I had to go through to take the Series 65 and get accredited. Broadly, yes, I'm in favor of reform. Recently wrote an op-ed in the Information arguing for reform. I think the scope of reform, I would say, might be like a little bit less broad than I think most people. I think part of my argument for reform is specifically drawing on my experience living and working in Silicon Valley, where investing in your friends and investing in your coworkers is like a big part of not only the culture, but also I think part of what keeps the ecosystem here going, where there's people who are willing to bet on you before you just have an idea. And to the extent that like an exam or something like that would make becoming accredited easier for people who are knowledgeable and know what they're doing, but don't meet the financial requirements, I'm in favor of that. At the same time, like I think investor protection is a worthwhile goal, and there's a lot of scams and stuff out there. And the sort of reform I would like to see, like with respect to an exam, wouldn't necessarily be like just an exam that anybody can take and then they can invest in anything, but something a little narrower. For instance, like an exam, that if startup employees take, they can invest in their coworkers, or if you live, if you work in a certain industry, like if you say you work at a landscaping company and your friend is leaving to start like their own business, like it'd be nice to invest in kind of a hometown business or something like that. I worry about expanding access too much, but I do see, situations where, in my hometown, like people start businesses, but they can't even raise money from friends and family. They have to, either get a small business loan or go get some sort of other institutional capital. And the equity growth and the gains from, this homegrown business, they're not like coming back to the community. They're not coming back to the people who supported you just because they don't meet the net worth requirements or post August 2020 don't want to go through the whole like tedious process that I went through, which I honestly wouldn't wish on anybody else.
Right. No, that sounds tough. Well, hopefully, voices like yours and others who are in favor of broadening access to the private securities markets will get some traction here in 2025. In the meantime, thank you so much, Nathan, for coming on. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Dara, as always, for co-hosting. For everyone else, if you want information about ICANN, you can go to icanlaw.org, and we'll see you on the next Capital Ideas.
Thanks so much for having me.